It's 2 for 1 Jack, splat, just like that. Bringing you tons of information, that's where he's at. He goes around town covering topics you'd like to know. Well, that's what you get when you tune in to the 2 for 1 Jack Show.
We are encouraging everybody to go over, sign those postcards, make sure you get your voice heard and known. We will be delivering all of those postcards off to either Tony Pham or Jason Crow. So we want to start putting pressure on both of those men to get this geo facility shut down.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then as you go down the tables, we have some posters for you to grab. You can definitely grab those posters and take pictures with them if you like. And then we do have Ren. He is actually here to represent a fossil-free future. So we have a petition for you to sign. Please go over there and sign that petition. It is to end environmental racism. So we have that set up as well. And I am actually going to go ahead and get started since we're a little bit late. So here we go, okay? All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Oh, wait, before I go on with that, we do have security set up as well. So just in case anybody's here trying to do anything funny, you know, I just want to let you know that we do have security here to keep everybody safe. So I want to thank you for coming out as well, okay? So I want to thank everybody who has taken the time to volunteer and make all of this happen. My name is Lisa Tran. I am Vietnamese and Chinese descent, and I was born here in Denver, Colorado. And this all started when I asked 10 years ago, where did my people come from? At the end of the day, I'm not really sure my race defines my identity. I was still trying to figure this out when I was trying to see what it meant to be Asian American in the United States. Both my parents had fled their countries as refugees, dealing with family losses during World War II and the Vietnam War. In 1977, my grandpa had bought 2 ships for my mom's family to escape the borders of North Vietnam. Their boat trip lasted about 72 hours. Once they made it to their new hometown on the west side of China, they traveled on foot the rest of the way and settled down. My mom and aunties and uncles all went to school, but they never got a chance to go to college. So my mom always goes and tells me, you can spend the rest of your life working. Work is something that will never go away. But education only happens for a little bit, and then it gets a little bit more complicated when you get older. Going all the way back to my great-grandparents in the 1930s, there was no such thing as school. It was mostly about farming to make ends meet. When my parents came over here to America, it wasn't just for them. It was because they wanted a better life for their children. My mom's arrival to Colorado in 1990 was frightening. She had no prior knowledge of speaking English and had to leave her entire family behind. Her first job here in America was a waitress at Sunny's China Cafe. She picked up English from her coworkers. She told me people were so kind when she first came to America, but over time it seems much of those people's angers was placed out on us for being a different shade of melanin. As for my dad and grandpa, their family line has gone through major PTSD from the Vietnam War. My grandpa was drafted to war with his brother and was never allowed any sort of education, while my dad's family suffered from chemical agents such as Agent Orange. As both my parents fled from their hometowns, they arrived to Colorado when the acceptance of Asians was finally recognized in 1990, even though the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed in 1965. So here we are, generations later. When Tony Pham was announced as the new ICE director, I felt so much outrage and anger. As a Vietnamese refugee, Tony Pham, how could you turn your back on my people, on your people, and putting immigrants into cages?
Yeah.
For doing the same thing you did coming over to America. Immigrants come to America to start life over.
Yep.
And as humans, we all endure mistakes. And we can learn from them instead of punishing ourselves by locking humans up in cages. So as we sit here today, I want you to take the time to reflect. What does it mean to be a human being made of light, love, and gratitude? Operating on love will take us further than we can ever imagine. So, I want everybody to close their eyes for a second. I want you to take your hand and put it over your heart so that you can feel your heart beating. I want you to take a deep breath in, and a deep breath out. And now I want you to repeat the following with me, and say it loud and say it proud. You are the love of my life.
You are the love of my life.
I love you, my brothers and sisters.
I love you, my brothers and sisters.
I love me for me.
I love me for me.
That is some of the hardest thing for some of us to say to ourselves. So I want you to feel the love that you give to yourself when you say that. I want to give a shout out to all of our guest speakers, our volunteers coordinating the postcard table, Melanated Mike Night, and Colorado Immigration Rights Coalition for providing us sound, Amplify the Voice for the live Facebook stream, and New Era Colorado for registering people to vote. If you are unsure of your voter registration, please go see them. They are set up on the sidewalk, and they will get you taken care of before of the elections on November 3rd. Your voice and your vote matters. So please go over there to make sure you're registered to vote, and they do speak Spanish as well if you need an interpretation. So for the next hour and a half, I'd like to give you, each speaker, your undivided attention. There will be postcards for you to sign, and we're going to send those off to legislators in opposition of the GEO facility. Also, as a means of fighting environmental racism and bringing environmental justice to Colorado, we have Ren Smith with Colorado Sierra Club that will be collecting signatures for an ongoing petition as well. Please go see him to get your signature in, and so he will also be on the sidewalk. We are still adhering to social distancing and sanitation, so please be aware of your surroundings at all times. So let's begin with Tien Pham's story. Here to represent Tien Pham will be Gladys. And currently Tien Pham is in detainee at the moment, so she will be giving his story. Please give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor for me to be able to share this story. Tien Pham was born in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. Tien's father served alongside the United States in the South Vietnamese Army. After the United States left, Tien's father was incarcerated in a re-education camp for 5 years, where he was subjected to forced labor and to eat rodents to survive. Once released, Tien's father sought to get his family out of the country. In 1996, Tien's family fled to the United States as refugees and were resettled in a poor housing project in San Jose. Growing up, Tien and other Vietnamese youth faced constant attacks and bullying by gangs and other kids who taunted them for not speaking English. Like many Southeast Asian and immigrant youth, Tien began associating with gangs for protection and engaging in petty crimes, truancy, and drinking. Shortly after turning 17, Tien got into a fight with a group of other teenagers and stabbed one of them. He was arrested soon afterward, and the district attorney charged him as an adult. He was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 28 years in prison. While in prison, Tien grew up, dealt with his trauma despite being surrounded by violence. Tien obtained his college degree, became a leader in the Roots Ethnic Studies program, an accomplished distance runner, and worked in the San Quentin News. After 20 years of incarceration, the Board of Parole hearings recommended that Tien be released from prison early, noting that his involvement in the crime was due to large part of his young age and that he no longer posed danger. Tien was most recently incarcerated at the San Quentin State Prison and witnessed the catastrophic outbreak of COVID unfold around him. after the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation transferred 121 men from California Institute for Men on May 30th, 2020, at least 2/3 of the San Quentin population became infected with COVID-19. With 26 deaths and counting, Tien witnessed his friends get sick and die around him. On August 31st, 2020, after surviving much on what was supposed to be his first day of freedom, and despite Tien being exposed to the preventable outbreak at San Quentin, Governor Newsom and the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation turned Tien over to ICE, and he was transferred to the GEO for-profit ICE facility in Aurora. Governor Newsom failed to use his power to tell CDRC to release Tien to his family, who were ready to welcome him home. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Gladys for sharing Tien Pham's story. So as we have all heard, he is actually sitting in the GEO facility behind us. He is of Vietnamese descent, and currently I believe he's still sitting in there right now. Hopefully he can hear us. Tien, if you can hear us from in there, don't give up hope. We are all out here standing in solidarity for you. So let us soak in the fact that these trivials are very real. And again, remind yourself what it means to be a human being made of light, love, and gratitude. Next, we have Stephanie Nguyen, a Vietnamese American descent born here in the U.S. Stephanie is a byproduct of Vietnamese refugees and experienced the due process of immigration all the way back from her great-grandparents. Stephanie endured exhaustion, constantly fighting for a chance to sit at a table that was built to exclude BIPOC. So while protesting this summer, Stephanie and her friends created Melanated Mic Night. Seeing the need for melanated voices to be amplified, uplifted, and free from judgment or racism, she wanted to create a space for BIPOC to be their authentic selves. No apologies. She found her purpose in activism and community organizing. Please welcome Stephanie Nguyen.
Hi guys, you guys are really quiet, so I'm gonna make you chant. Alright? Show me what resistance looks like.
This is what resistance looks like.
Louder, you're not loud enough. Show me what resistance looks like.
This is what resistance looks like.
Thank you. Okay. There's this Vietnamese saying that I've heard my entire life. I'm certain a lot of our Vietnamese relatives here today have heard this saying as well. Ăn ngoan nhớ kẻ chân cây, which means when eating fruit, think of the person who planted the tree. Ăn ngoan nhớ kẻ chân cây. I remember sitting in my my ngoai's home. Ngoai means maternal grandfather. In Port Arthur, Texas, when I was 6 years old. Swinging back and forth on his gai bang, that means hammock. All snuggled up next to him as he recited these words to me. My ngoai was a man of a few words. We barely spoke the older I got because I lost the language after I started going to school. But when he spoke of wisdom, resistance, humor, and love. I remember the humidity in the air and the smell of magnolia trees surrounding the neighborhood that my grandfather lived in. The same neighborhood that my mom spent her childhood and teenage years. I realized at the age of 5 that I was different from my schoolmates in Southern California. I remember being made fun of for always having cơm chiên, thịt kho, or bánh mì for lunch. I think about all the refugee children and all the children of refugees, how their stories are similar to that of mine and my ancestors. I have been thinking about my bako, that means great-grandmother, a lot these last couple of years leading up to where I am standing now. I helped my mother take care of her before she passed. She lived to be 105 years old. Becco lived through war all of her life. She watched her siblings, mother, and father die of starvation during World War II when the Japanese occupied our country, which resulted in a mass famine that killed about 2 million of our Vietnamese relatives. She watched as Vietnam slowly began liberating itself from French colonial rule. She traveled by foot alongside my uncle, that means great-grandfather, and their children. From northern Vietnam all the way down to southern Vietnam, they walked to seek a better life where there's more resources like food. My family managed to sail away on my uncle's boat before the fall of Saigon. My mom was only 3 or 4 at the time. They knew the dangers they'd be facing while traveling on the open seas, but they did it anyway to preserve our family. I remember looking my mom in her eyes as we sat by my Becco's side on her deathbed. She was on day 6 of starving herself. I held my Becco's hands as I looked my mom in her eyes and told her that it was time to let her go. We spent months taking care of her and finding creative ways to get her to eat. She had never gone that long without eating. She'd starve herself, but she'd eventually eat. This time was different. I told my mom she's ready to go. She's seen a lot in her lifetime. She loved and she lost loved ones. Her grandson, one of her sons, and her husband have all passed before her. She was ready to reunite with them again. I told my mom, I can see it in Becco's eyes. They had the same white fog in them that my uncle and my White had in their eyes before they passed. I will never forget the way the eyes look when the spirit of a human is ready to move on. My mom started crying and held on to her grandmother as tight as she could. She was the last piece of my grandfather that my mom had left. After 10 days of starvation, my Becco died at 3:48 p.m. on July 9th, 2015, surrounded by love. It is somewhat poetic to think that this woman who's been through so much, who survived so much, chose to end her life the same way her siblings and her parents passed. I'm sharing this story with you all today because a Vietamese refugee named Tony Pham was recently named the new director of ICE. As you can all see, this is a very emotional and disappointing time for those of us in the Vietamese community. Our relatives, our ancestors have been through so much, from 1,000 years of resisting Chinese imperialism and all the battles and wars that came after. Our relatives, our ancestors, have done nothing but survive in a world built to oppress them and other brown and black relatives throughout this world. The systems that we grew up with here in the States was built to keep us down. I'm certain a lot of people here in the Asian community all learned something similar to what I learned as a child. Keep your head down, be invisible. These are words that I was told and taught because my relatives saw the dangers of having melanin in their skin. They saw how our black relatives are treated when they first step foot onto this soil. They saw how our brown relatives are considered illegal. Illegal. How can one be illegal on stolen land? Did we all forget the genocide that happened on the soil before this country became the land of the free? Might I add, this genocide is still active today. What does it mean to be free when you can't even enter this country to seek asylum? If this country was really built for freedom and liberty for all, then why wouldn't this government system allow others to experience freedom and liberty? Tony Pham, I know that you know the saying, but I'm gonna say it to you again. So you can so you can hear me. Sorry, I'm getting heated. So you can hear me. Because I'm done being a model minority. I am done keeping my head down and being invisible. For too long, our Vietnamese community has been hiding. Did you know that there are a lot of Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, Hmong, and other Southeast Asian refugees who are currently sitting in ICE concentration camps throughout this country? My Bang Ngoại, which means maternal grandmother, was considered an alien for most of her life here in the States. She cannot read or write, but she found a way to get her citizenship last October because she was afraid that she would be thrown into an ICE concentration camp. Anh Ngoan nhớ kể trong cay. What does that mean to you, Tony? Because for me, in my 30 years of hearing those words being recited by my Ngoại and my mother after his passing, Anwan Nyilke Changkai means that I was a seed that was planted by my ancestors. And as a fruit of their labor, I must remember where I came from. Tony, if you knew the history of how our ancestors were conceived, you would know that we came from a dragon and a fairy, both mystical beings. You would know that we were brought here on this earth to continue down the path of liberation for our relatives and ultimately to set an example of how we as humans can overcome any adversities thrown our way. Anwan Yilke Chungkai. It means to not only be grateful for our ancestors, but to preserve our culture and our people. We are not doing that if we are out here helping the oppressors. We are not following through with what's been passed down to us. Generational trauma is a real thing. How can you forget, Tony? How can you wake up every day and not feel the weight of our ancestors? How can you be a Vietamese refugee and lead an organization that is actively practicing ethnic cleansing of melanated humans? Slowly killing off people who only want to give their relatives and descendants a chance of survival. What will come of this? What gains do you, Tony, have out of tearing families apart and throwing them in cages? I'm not going to ask you to imagine the pain that comes with being dehumanized, because you should already know that. We as descendants of dragons and fairies have been dehumanized and still are being dehumanized, yet you can lay here and sleep well at night, knowing that you're participating in white supremacy. I stand here today, and I will continue doing so until my last dying breath, in solidarity with all of our melanated relatives, in hopes of contributing to a community that is built upon dismantling all systems of oppression. The ICE concentration camp must be shut down. These refugees, immigrants, are people too. They should all be with their families. They should all be freed. They can't do that, Tony, if you're contributing and benefiting from the systems of oppression that our ancestors and relatives have resisted and fought against for centuries. As a friend and comrade once tweeted, after Tony was announced to be the next ICE director, they tweeted, "Tony is a disgracian." I don't know if you guys know what that means, but disgracian is disgrace and Asian morphed into one word. He's a disgracian. We will continue resisting, we will continue fighting, and we will not stop until they are all free, until we are all free. These systems of oppression will be dismantled, and you will be brought to justice for aiding in white supremacy. You have become the one thing that my Bako feared until her last dying breath. Ju, I remember following her around the house. She was only 4 feet 8 inches tall. She was frail and she only weighed 80 pounds. She was lugging around a 10-pound bag of rice, yelling that we had to hide the rice before Ju comes and steals it from us. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the word, it's what they called the oppressors in Vietnam. My Bako would spend hours yelling and crying about Ju and how she didn't want me because she wasn't in her right mind. She thought I was her older sister. She didn't want me to die of starvation. She carried that bag of rice up and down the stairs and attempted to cut open her bed to hide the rice, and up until the day before she decided to starve herself to death. I will be working to make sure you step down and that the systems you decided to work for is dismantled. Until then, Ju, anh ngoan nhớ kể chân cay.
Gotta keep it COVID safe. Can you guys give it up one more time for Stephanie? Thank you for sharing that story. So we actually have some aguas frescas set up. So support local business is right there for you. There are a couple flavors for you to get. There's also some chinga la migra. There's some t-shirts over there to get. So support your local businesses over there. And just a reminder, if you want any contact with the speakers, they'll definitely be available at the press and media table towards the back over there. So now we will share Na Vong Sandoval's story. Na Vong Sandoval is a fierce and passionate social justice advocate for those seeking refuge and safety. She amplifies these issues and voices through education, advocacy, storytelling, and lobbying. She's a Vietnamese refugee who fled her homeland where she and her family became boat people and displaced on refugee camps. Na is the Refugee Congress delegate for Colorado, a founding member and public speaker with Rocky Mountain Board of Directors, a Noble Ambassador for Christina Noble Children's Foundation serving children in Vietnam and Mongolia, and a Denver Little Saigon Redevelopment Group advisory member. She has publicly spoken at the World Refugee Day Colorado at the state capitol and at the Families Belong Together rally at Civic Center Park in 2018, when the terms family separation and kids in cages were initially exposed to the public. Please welcome Na Vong Sandoval.
Yeah.
Can I have everyone gather a little closer together so I can see all your beautiful faces and feel your energy? Can we gather a little bit closer, please? Thank you. I want to see your beautiful faces. Come on. Fleeing your homeland is terrifying. Losing everything that is familiar to you and everything that you love is traumatizing. I know this because I'm a Vietnamese refugee. I also know that we had very little options when we left at the time, at the time of the war. We ended up on a rickety, dilapidated cargo ship that was not intended for human passengers. It was certainly not intended for people to travel long distances. We sat on overcrowded ships with the elderly, with women, with children, with the sick. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring. We didn't have food, we didn't have water, and we placed our fate on the unknown. We finally landed on 2 refugee camps, with the final one being here in the United States. There was such adversity and there was such challenge to acclimate into our new home. We didn't know the language, we didn't know the culture, we didn't know the people. And on top of that, we were greeted not by welcoming people, but by protesters on the refugee camps telling us, "Gook, go back to where you came from." But what they didn't know was that we couldn't go back to where we came from. And we weren't welcome into our new home either. These experiences, my refugee experience, has taught me to be more compassionate and strengthen my empathy for others who are also seeking refuge. In 2003, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was established. Now we all know why it was established. It's an anti-refugee, it's an anti-immigrant, it's an anti-asylum seeker organization. And we all know that it's not for the purpose of protecting this country. I know this because I used to work in Homeland Security, where I was monitoring local and national threats. And guess what? Refugees and immigrants never came up even once as a threat. Woo! In fact, it has very little to do with protecting the homeland, and it has everything to do with further the agenda of the existing administration to deny entry for anyone who wants to seek refuge in this country. It also helps to make lucrative profits for shareholders and investors who are making money on the backs and sweat and tears and lives of others at their most worst situation, at the most worst trauma that you could endure as a human being. In 2013, there was a repatriation act between the United States and 3 Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. As per this agreement, the United States had a bilateral treaty that basically said if you are from these three countries and you arrived before 1995, you are exempt from deportation no matter what the circumstances. And in 2017, we had a new administration who recanted and reneged against this agreement, saying that you will be eligible for deportation now. And it doesn't matter where you came from per this agreement or what we have agreed to. What does that actually mean? It means that over 15,000 refugees and immigrants from Southeast Asia are sitting in limbo right now, who don't know their fate, who have final orders of removal, and who may be deported. But you know what's even worse than the United States reneging and not honoring this contract? Is the fact of who will be executing these orders. It's Tony Pham, the new ICE director, one of ours, a Vietnamese refugee who knows what it's like to go through this trauma, who knows exactly how horrific it is to be able to endure and survive that type of trauma and horrificness. And he stated the reason he accepted the position was because he had a debt to repay and an obligation to the United States. That debt is exactly what's denying his own people from arriving and having the exact opportunity that he was granted. He also uses that same old argument that he came over legally. Well, guess what, Tony Pham? It used to be legal to hold black people in slavery. It was also legal to only account black people for 3/5 of a person. It was also legal to ban Chinese immigrants after you exploited the hell out of them out of cheap labor, brought them here, and now are banning them from entering into the United States. It was also legal to remove Japanese citizens, Japanese American citizens, from their homes and rip them from their families and place them into internment camps. We see that these laws are racist and biased and xenophobic. Why can't you, Tony Pham, see how xenophobic these racist laws are? He responded, this is really interesting, this past Tuesday, he responded and made a public statement about protesters that visited his home in opposition to his role just this past Tuesday. And he said, I'm really disappointed that there are individuals who think that it's okay to target women and children. By accepting his role as the ICE director, he is targeting women and children. He is separating families. He is putting kids in cages. He is allowing for hysterectomies on women without their damn consent. And he is the one terrorizing families. And so I believe when he said terrorizing women and children, he just meant his women and children.
His own conscience. His own conscience.
We are here today, I am here today, as a representative of the AAPI community, to send this message, this very clear message, to him, to those in Colorado, to ICE, and everybody nationwide. Ông Tony không đại diện cho chúng tôi. Tony does not represent us. Người tị nạn thực sự sẽ không bao giờ bỏ quên cái người tị nạn khác. A true refugee would never turn their back on another refugee.
Yeah.
you may use your legal status to weaponize and dehumanize others because you've been colonized into thinking that being a refugee is something illegal.
Yeah.
You have been colonized to think that being a refugee is something to be ashamed of. I stand with refugees. I stand with immigrants.
Yes.
I stand with asylum seekers.
Yeah.
And I will continue to fight to ensure
Yeah.
that every single person
Yes.
who wants the same opportunity will be ensured that they have this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because unlike you, Tony Pham, I'm a proud refugee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Being a proud refugee and what it means to be a proud refugee.
Yeah.
Tony Pham, I hope you are out here listening right now. So as we transition into the next speaker, we are about to touch upon some recent events with female detainees and hysterectomies. Jessica Ordaz grew up in Brentwood, California. She is a granddaughter of Bracero, am I saying that right? Bracero agricultural laborers and the daughter of migrant workers. Jessica is the Assistant Professor of Ethnic Studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. She received her doctorate from the University of California, Davis in American History with a minor field in Latin American History. Professor Ordaz is currently completing her first book, The Shadow of El Centro, Migrant Incarceration and Solidarity, which is under contract with the University of North Carolina Press Justice, Power and Politics series. Please welcome Jessica Ordaz.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Today I want to give you a little bit of background, specifically historical background on some of the recent incidents that happened at the Irwin Detention Facility. The recent allegation that a doctor has performed hysterectomies on immigrant women at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia has sparked calls for investigation. Dawn Wooten, a whistleblower and nurse, claims that many women have undergone these surgeries without their consent. The Institute for the Elimination of Poverty and Genocide at Project South reports that many migrant women disclose receiving a hysterectomy while detained at ICDC. Wooten claims that everybody the gynecologist sees has a hysterectomy. Thank you. Just about everybody. This has been so concerning for Wooten that she started calling the gynecologist the uterus collector. Many of the women that underwent this procedure were not told why they needed a hysterectomy, which raises the important question of consent. Project South revealed one woman's experience. Quote, she reported feeling scared and frustrated, saying it felt like they were trying to mess with her body. She was originally told by the doctor that she had an ovarian cyst and was going to have a small 20-minute procedure. Instead, the officer who was transporting her to the hospital told her that she was receiving a hysterectomy to have her womb removed. This disturbing allegation is only the latest case of systemic medical neglect and mistreatment in immigration detention settings. The spread of COVID-19 has been particularly devastating for people in migrant detention centers. The difficulty of socially isolating, distancing while in detention has led to outbreaks at facilities throughout the country, including most recently at an ICE detention center in Adelanto, California, where 6 people have been hospitalized. These stories may be appalling, but they are not surprising. Migrant detention centers have been violent places of medical neglect and death since they first became operational. Detention facilities were designed to be instructive and punitive by discouraging unauthorized migration, and as a result have long been conduits of harm and death. Across the country, migrants in custody and detention face medical mistreatment, poor sanitation, overcrowding, physical and psychological abuse, and poor nutrition, all practices the state has long condoned or embraced. The link between medical abuse, racism, and immigration runs deep. In 1914, the United States Public Health Service allied itself with the eugenics movement, working with eugenic organizations and producing reports that supported eugenic drives to restrict immigration. The goal was to regulate the reproductive capacity of people deemed mentally defective, undesirable, and harmful to society, including those labeled sexual or criminal deviants, people of color, poor, disabled, and migrants. In this case, the United States Public Health Service and the Bureau of Immigration disinfected arriving migrants from Mexico believed to be dirty and contagious as early as 1916. This discourse also led to reproductive violence in places like Puerto Rico. In 1937, Law 116 made sterilization legal and free in Puerto Rico. Many poor and working class women were pushed to use sterilization as a form of birth control. The first birth control pill became available in 1956 and was tested on Puerto Rican women living in government housing. At this time, this pill was 20 times stronger, which left women suffering from blurred vision, depression, and strokes. The 1970s was a particularly dark period in the history of reproductive abuse for women of color. In 1973, the case of 2 black children in Alabama revealed how entrenched sterilization abuse was in the South. The Reeve sisters, aged 12 and 14, were declared mentally incompetent by an Alabama physician who sterilized them before using federal funding. The children's mother could not read or write and was deceived into marking an X on the consent forms. The sisters were surgically sterilized. During this decade, Native American women also accused the Indian Health Service of sterilizing at least 25% of Native American women who were between the ages of 15 and 44. Perceptions of immigrant women of color as dirty, diseased, and hyperfertile continue to be used to justify anti-migrant violence across the 20th century. These stereotypes have had violent ends for decades. For instance, in 1978, the infamous court case Madrigal v. Killigan revealed that medical professionals coerced and at times forced Latinas to undergo sterilization in Los Angeles. 10 Mexican women represented by Antonia Hernandez filed a lawsuit against USC LA County Medical Center, arguing that they provided consent under inappropriate conditions and after being harassed. They did not understand the forms they signed as no translations were provided. The plaintiffs requested financial compensation for coercive sterilization and demanded that the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare incorporate sterilization counseling and consent forms in multiple languages. In the end, the judge argued that the county hospital should not be held responsible, arguing that the doctors did not have that intentions. These views based on white supremacy also flourished alongside the development of an intricate system of immigration control throughout the 20th century. Immigration authorities declared the detention was not intended as punishment, yet prisoner testimonies and government sources suggest that mistreatment served as one of the primary ways to maintain order. The state used dominant constructions about race and gender inside detention centers to discipline, surveil, and punish immigrants. Immigration detention increased within the context of World War II, national security fears, and the Bracero program, the Mexican guest worker program. In fact, from the moment the El Centro immigration detention camp became operational in California in 1945, local immigration and naturalization service agents and officials used detained Mexican migrants to labor in their private homes and farms, maintain the immigration detention camp, and construct buildings throughout the region. The number of immigration detention facilities grew between the 1950s and the 1970s as immigration agents increased the policing of Mexican migrants along the U.S.-Mexico border. During this period, immigration officials used DDT and sterilizing agents on migrants held in detention centers across the United States to rid their bodies of lice. Detention conditions were so appalling that on December 28, 1973, Albert Garcia, president of the Mexican American Association, wrote a letter to INS Commissioner Leonard Chapman. Garcia requested that Chapman respond to several concerns, including the physical and sexual abuse inflicted by INS guards, agents breaking and entering into private residences, churches, and schools to seek out unauthorized migrants, the deportation of legal permanent residents, the killing of migrants, and the inhumane treatment of migrants held inside detention centers. And yet, the U.S. has only expanded the systems of immigration detention in the years since, with conditions continuing to be deplorable. In the year 2000, 10% of the women detained inside the Chrome detention facility in Miami declared that guards raped them. Their claims became news when 2 of the women became pregnant while still in detention. In 2009, the Washington Post reported that since 2003, there have been 83 deaths of people in immigration custody, many from HIV and AIDS complications. Most recently, the world learned about Elsa Guadalupe Gonzalez, a 24-year-old Guatemalan migrant who hung herself in a cell at the Eloy Detention Center in Arizona on April 28, 2013. More than 24 migrants have died in the custody of CBP during the Trump administration, including 7-year-old Jacqueline Maquin, 2-year-old Wilmer Jose Ramirez, and 16-year-old Leon Gutierrez. These examples of anti-migrant violence not only demonstrate the widespread brutality within the system, they also reflect the geographical spread of migrant detention throughout the entire country. The allegations of medical violence committed against women held inside the Irwin County Detention Center should absolutely be investigated. But this complaint should direct our attention to the broader system that made such an allegation plausible, because it routinely breeds violence in detention. Immigration detention facilities were designed to inflict abuse and not prioritize the health of migrants. This is part of a much broader and deeper story of associating migrants as inferior, dirty, and other. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you to Jessica for informing us. If you guys did not hear that, she had stated at least 10% of the female detainees in there get raped and murdered. So females, we need to stand together and not let this happen. We gotta let Tony Pham know we don't stand for this. So F all that. If you haven't gotten a chance to sign a postcard to him or Jason Crow, letting him know we're trying to shut this geo facility down, please go see them. The ladies back there will help you out with that. We will be having a guest speaker that will be touching bases on mental health. We will be having J.R. Cole come up to share his story. J.R. is the founder of Coffee with J.R., a mental health and diversity inclusion training service company, and a professional speaker, trainer, and coach. He has over 10 years of experience in public speaking and has trained college students and professors at over 45 universities and dozens of corporations across the country. JR also teaches at CU Boulder and CU Denver on leadership, cultural competency, and mental health. As an immigrant that has struggled with the immigration system, JR is passionate about advocating for immigration reform and supporting immigrants. Please welcome JR Quo, everybody.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you. And thank you for all the speakers that spoke before me. Jessica, Na, Stephanie. Are you feeling it? Are you feeling it? Right?
Yeah.
I can feel the anger, the frustration inside me. And let's just take a couple seconds. Don't let them fool us. Don't let them control our anger. So let's take a couple seconds. Let's take a couple deep breaths. And I want you to take a couple seconds to look around. Look around here. How awesome, how amazing. All of you, make eye contact with the person next to you, the people around you. Make eye contact with them. Yeah, thank you. Because I want, from deepest of my heart, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you. It's such an honor for me to be here, to speak to you all, to share my stories. So again, my name is J.R. Guo. I'm a professional speaker. I specialize in mental health and cultural diversity inclusion. So the company I found is Coffee with JR. Our mission is pretty straightforward. It's to normalize mental health and prevent suicide. So, thank you. So, I am an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 9 years old from Taiwan. Since then, I have struggled with the whole immigration system for 27 years of my life. 27 years. That's over a quarter century. That's 2/3 of my life. For 27 years, I went through different visas to unknown, to more different visas to unknowns, and finally, 3 years ago, I was able to get my green card.
Yeah.
Thank you. 3 years ago. So every step of the way, I had to fight the system. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. However, with this, it comes with tremendous mental health, psychological, emotional tolls, damages, and costs. And here are a couple of examples. Back in 2011, when I was going through waiting for my H-1B. If you don't know, H-1B is a work visa. All my documentation, my student visa, my driver's license, everything was expired. I didn't have health insurance. I couldn't work. I couldn't make money. I didn't have income. I didn't have a place to stay. Just imagine how scary that was. How stressful it was. I was in that limbo for months. And guess what? Do you know what the greatest cost was? The greatest cost was I could not see my dying mother for one last time. I had not seen her for over 20 years. And I couldn't. We decided I just afraid to leave the country because knowing that most likely I couldn't come back in. And I couldn't see her for one last time. So standing here, looking at that facility and all the facilities around the country, I can imagine the kids, the babies, the family, the parents, what that they're going through, separating kids from their family. And how fucked up is that? Excuse my language. How screwed up is that? You know, our immigration system is broken. It is. And unfortunately, a lot of people have no idea. They don't get it. They don't understand the pain and suffering that we have to go through. Again, I consider myself one of the lucky ones because throughout the whole my 27 years, I have amazing people that supported me. I have received so many supports. And specifically, I want to thank my former boss, Dr. DJ Ida, for her unconditional support and her compassion. And I also want to thank my therapist of 10 years. Unfortunately, she passed away last summer. For every single turn, whenever I was in my dark moments, and there were many, many dark moments, I was depressed, I was down, I feel hopeless, I was afraid getting deported back to a country that I barely know. My therapist was there with me every step of the way, listening to my stories, listening to my grief, guiding me, giving me hope. So with their support and a lot of inner healing, and a lot of inner work, now I can proudly say that I'm a proud immigrant.
Yeah.
Because for years, for 27 years, I feel like I was inferior. I was second-class citizen. I was ashamed and embarrassed of my immigrant status. But no more.
Yeah.
I can celebrate my immigrant past and identity with pride.
Yeah.
So again, looking at this facility, Lisa asked me to share what I think. I think this facility and many facilities like this across the country, they're a scam. It's national embarrassment.
Yeah.
It's national embarrassment. Separating kids from their family, inhuman treatments of inmates, and we dare to talk about human rights. Such hypocrite. So what I would like to see is convert this facility into voting stations,
Yeah.
into a community center that educate, provide health, mental health education, feed people, actually feed people,
Yeah.
feed people healthy food. That's what I want to see. So again, despite all these struggles that I went through, both internally, externally with the immigration system, there were so many people that stood by me all these years. So I want to give back. So if you know an immigrant, a refugee, that needs support, that needs mentorship, or just simply someone to talk to, please let me know. I would love to connect with that individual, with those individuals. And also my company, Coffee with JR. Recently, I have received a contract to provide culturally appropriate mental health training for Asian immigrants, refugees, and LGBTQ people communities.
Yeah.
So if you know any individuals or groups are interested, please let me know. You can reach me or find me on my website, which is coffeewithjr.com. Again, it's coffeewithjr.com. So please reach out. And again, it's such an honor to be here with you all. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Be safe.
Yeah.
All right, guys, give it up for JR one more time.
Yeah.
He is going to be providing some mental health for our immigrants. So as you know, your immigration process takes a very long time. It does not just take 1 year. As we have experience with JR's experience, his has taken 27 years. 27 years! What have you guys been doing within the last 5 years, you know? So, wow, it takes a lot of work to get your immigration status here in the U.S. And so with the GEO facility, yeah, let's shut this down. Let's turn it into a mental facility center to help out with those that do need help instead of just jailing them.
Yeah.
Because caging people does not help with mental health, right? We all know that.
It's 2 for 1 Jack, splat, just like that. Bringing you tons of information, that's where he's at. He goes around town covering topics you'd like to know. Well, that's what you get when you tune in to the 2 for 1 Jack Show.